Welcome everyone. My name is Samantha Oakley from ALA's Public Programs Office. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar, Creating Poverty Awareness and the Next Generation of Philanthropists. Before we start, I'd like to make a few quick announcements. Today's webinar is presented by ALA's Public Programs Office with support from ALA's Cultural Communities Fund. To learn more about the Cultural Communities Fund or make a contribution, visit ala.org/ccf. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with Programming Librarian, a website of ALA's Public Programs Office. We have a lot of program ideas and an online learning library full of free webinars just like this one. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Kelly Hinks.
Welcome everyone. My name is Kelly Hinks and I am the chair of the Sarah Jafarian School Library Program Award. And I'm proud to introduce today's webinar, Creating Poverty Awareness and the Next Generation of Philanthropists. The program series won the 2019 Sarah Jafarian Award. I'm sure you'll see, as the committee did, that this program was community-based and purpose-driven, and it created a way of incorporating student voice and expanding the school's curriculum. It allowed students to apply the library skills beyond the library walls. With that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Karen Reiber is a future-ready media technology specialist at Wyoming Middle School in Wyoming, Ohio. And during a recent renovation of their school, the library space was transformed into a learning commons with a makerspace. She teaches robotics and coding, information and digital literacy classes with a heavy emphasis on research and digital citizenship. Karen is a Glogster ambassador, district building iCoach with Info Ohio, Microsoft Innovative Educator, Sphero Lead Educator, Tech Club Advisor, a book lover, technology geek, lifelong learner, wife, mother, and grandmother. Karen collaborates with staff on design challenges that enrich and engage students, like this Poverty and Philanthropy class. Our other presenter today is Jamie Hayner, and she is a 6th grade social studies teacher at Wyoming Middle School. She attended Ohio University, where she received her Bachelor's of Science in Middle Childhood Education. And in 2008, Jamie received her degree in Educational Leadership from the Citadel. She is very passionate about educating and encouraging students about childhood poverty in Cincinnati, and she hopes to inspire empathy within her students and create the next generation of philanthropists through their time, talent, or treasure. And with that, I'm pleased to turn the mic over to Karen.
Thank you so much. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for being here today, and we're excited to share with you our class that we worked on over the last few years together. We would first like to take the opportunity, next slide please, to thank the American Library Association and the Sarah Jafarian Award Committee for this great honor and the grant award that came with it. We are so excited to take our class, what we've been working on over the last few years, and transform it again this year with some additional funding, as Jamie will talk about our budget, that it's going to be really a help to take the next step in this. Next, I'd like to, next slide, please. I want to introduce Jamie. Jamie, our 6th grade teacher who teaches Cowboy Bell, and she'll talk about that. She's the one that does all the heavy lifting here. She's the one that's teaching the class on day to day. I come in and out occasionally, but she really does a fabulous job, not only with our kids, but taking this issue in our community of poverty and then taking it and making the students aware, getting them involved and engaged.
All right, thank you. So just quickly, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about how this presentation is going to be led. We have spent many years, about 5, developing this, putting things in, taking things out. So we're going to kind of lead you through the first 4 years, and then we're going to talk about last year, which is what the award won, and then we're going to talk about some future as well, and then actually invite some kids in from last year too to come in and give their point of view and their experience as well. Next slide.
Yeah, and so as we get started here, I'd like to say that we're excited to share this class that we put together, but we also have set it up so that you could follow the slides and you could probably recreate the class from the information contained here. All the links are there. We talked about the books that we've used and other resources, so that we're hoping that you could also start this. And we think that it could probably go from a 5th grade, even maybe a 4th grade parts of it on up to high school and beyond. So you can adopt parts of it that you may want to include in your classes.
All right, so I want to start first by talking about the class that we teach this in. So this is a very unique class. It is called Cowboy Bell. It was created about 10 years ago, and what was happening was we had students that needed to receive gifted services and students that needed to receive intervention, and they were being pulled out of the normal classroom. So they created Cowboy Bell, which allowed the students that were remaining in the room to have some time to do some projects. So this is a project-based learning class. It is ungraded, so they really have to be motivated and interested in the topics that we teach. But what is really nice is we have the freedom to teach topics that are outside our normal core curriculum. I've been teaching it from the beginning. This is my 10th year teaching Cowboy Bell. And I don't want people to think like, oh, well, we don't have a Cowboy Bell, so we can't do a unit like this. I think that this is something that could be flexible content for social studies. So it is something that people could replicate. Just to give you an idea, as for timing, this class is about 42 minutes long, and this project, I feel like the first year that we did it was probably only a month, but currently with everything that we do, we're looking at about 2 months. It could even be probably spanned into 2.5 if you have the time. Budget-wise, we don't have a budget. We have no money, actually. So all of these resources that we have found have been free resources. We're going to talk about a service project that we would take the kids to the Free Store Food Bank, which we will talk about later. We actually had to ask the kids to bring in money for the bus. So if you don't have a budget, this is the project for you. Or if you have a budget, this is great too. So no worries there. All right, next slide, please. So the idea of this, I spent years and years bringing projects in, taking projects out. I did STEM units, literature circles, readers theaters. I mean, you name it, I tried it. And I would try things and gauge, how much students were interested in it, how much they really, what did they take away from it? I had a conversation with Karen one day about what was happening in Cincinnati, and a light bulb went off. And I'm going to let Karen take a moment and to tell you guys the current situation in Cincinnati before I continue.
So at that time, Cincinnati was ranked 2nd in childhood poverty. Now, we're a suburb outside of Cincinnati. And so that was really very alarming statistic, and it woke up our city as well. And a childhood Poverty Collaborative was formed to kind of study that. And so when Jamie and I talked about that, we talked about statistics that 80,000 students, 80,000 kids rather, in our choice area where our services are in this area, there's 80,000 kids that don't know where their next meal is coming, that they're food insecure. We rank 13th in the nation, Cincinnati does, in poverty. Ohio ranks as number 11 of the major cities in the United States. So those are pretty alarming numbers for poverty. And it was kind of a wake-up call for our school, who we'll talk about the demographics here in just a minute. But we knew that we needed to do something and help to make our student body aware and get them engaged in this problem, because they are part of the solution. They are part of the solution not only in this class, but they're going to be part of the solution in the future as well.
Great. And I can tell you the first year that we did this unit, we knew it was something that we wanted to continue to do. And that's based off of, not only parent feedback, but also just the kids really enjoyed learning about it. Their empathy that they had. I mean, it was incredibly inspiring. Next slide, please.
I did put a link on that last slide, 20 cities getting poorer article, just that you could kind of look and kind of see what are some of the cities that are struggling today. Next, I would like to talk a little bit about our community. So Wyoming, Ohio is located up north of Cincinnati, within our 275 loop that goes outside of the city. It's just a 2.2 square mile community. We are a working class community of a population of about 8,500. Our community very values education and supports education in our community, which is great for all facets, especially this class as well. We do have some Section 8 housing in our community, and we have about 7% of our kids on free and reduced lunch, which Jamie will kind of mention that too, that we have to be delicate with some of our students when we talk about this, because we know that some students, this is their life. And so we're talking about them. Wyoming Middle School students, that we are a population of 650 students, and we are grades 5 through 8 here. And it is our enrichment bell, cowboy bell, that we started this program in our 6th grade. Next slide.
So before we get into the exact pieces that we pulled in to create this curriculum, I do want to let everybody know, I email parents at the beginning of this unit. I think that it's important that parents know the conversations that are happening in class, because they're going to have questions, or they're going to want to go home and talk about what they've learned, or they may want to go home and talk about how they can help or what their family can do. So I send that email out and just explain the purpose, you know, what we're doing, why we're doing it. And then I also highlight topics that we are going to talk about as well. And then just, you know, also tell parents that they have any sort of connection, they're more than welcome to come in. And then we invite them on the service learning trips that we do. So any way that they want to become involved, we're more than happy to welcome them in. So when I first started this curriculum, I used something provided by the Mayerson Foundation. This is a local organization here in Cincinnati. They are dedicated to creating communities that are caring and respectful. They have something called the Hunger and Homelessness Toolbox. I'm going to grab it real quick. So it just is something that I printed off online. I talked to the director of the Mayerson Foundation, who runs some of the student service learning projects, and this is something that she said that I might be able to use. Looking through it, a lot of it I did have to modify. I would say it's directed more toward high school age, but there were some pieces that I could take, some like simulations that were really cool, that I was able to adapt to students that are 11 and 12. Next slide, please. So I used some of those lessons, but then I also, just in, you know, being so excited about creating this unit and talking to other teachers within the school, I was talking to one of the teachers downstairs, and she had mentioned an article that was written for the Cincinnati Enquirer that talked about a journalist who went into one of the poorest areas of Cincinnati to write an article about their new rec center. And when she went into the area, she was so shocked by what she saw at the schools, everything that the kids needed. I mean, kids coming in with clothes that had not been washed, just some medical issues that you would have thought would have been taken care of by then. And she felt like that was the story. It wasn't the rec center, it was that. So we pulled some pieces from that article. That article is linked on here. And we just discussed some of that with the kids. This area is only about 15 minutes away too. So I felt like the kids needed to realize, like, this is only 15 minutes away. Like, you know, we actually refer to Wyoming as a bubble sometimes. It's just the kids are, you know, within Wyoming, don't always know what's happening around them. So that was shocking to them to see, like, wow, somebody that's literally down the street, this is what their life is like. They also wrote a follow-up piece on that same area and that same school. And it was the most heartwarming piece about how, after people saw the article in the Cincinnati Enquirer, it was like a call to action. People, you know, asked how they could donate money. People donated beds. They donated food to the pantries. So it was a great opportunity, example for kids to see that there are people out there willing to help, and there are things that you can do, whether you're giving your time, your talent, or your treasure. Next slide.
A follow-up on that too, I ran into her. She received a journalism award for those articles, and she said how that they don't get involved in the article when they write it. And she was very involved with that article, and she spurred on a lot of other things. In fact, I tried to get her to come out for another piece of that, was about the journalism piece that we could put in. So we may reconnect with her again this year and see if we can get her to come out.
And then we arranged a field trip to the Free Store Food Bank, where students had the chance to pack power packs, and we'll let Karen talk a little bit about those.
Right, so at the Free Store Food Bank, it serves our Tri-County area. So it serves part of Kentucky, Indiana, and Ohio. And in our area, there's 80,000 students who don't know where their next meal is coming from. And so in order to help these students, because while they're in school, they have breakfast and lunch, but when they go home on the weekend, they have empty cupboards. So the Freestore Food Bank has a Power Pack program where there's about 18 items in a bag that's packed in the student's bag, book bag to go home for the weekend. And it is all things that they could heat up, that they can snack on. And so we'll kind of get them from the Friday to Monday when they come back to school. And some of the kids really struggle with that. We really struggle in our area too when they're off from school. The summer is always a struggle. But the snow days when some of our suburbs of our very rural areas, they really struggle because the parents, it's unexpected, they don't have food for the kids for that breakfast and lunch. So the Power Pack program has worked really great. The kids go in and it's like an assembly line. Mm-hmm. They crank up the music. The kids are really having a lot of fun. And then they get to tour and ask questions, and they really have asked a lot of good questions, and I think they get a lot from that experience of packing day. They always talk about it as one of the best parts of the program.
Well, and we always, when we do the tour of the warehouse too, they see all of this food that, I mean, I don't know if you know how big that warehouse is.
Well, the warehouse is huge, but it has about 10 million pounds of food, and that'll be gone in a week to 10 days.
Yeah.
And so all that food that they see is going to be wiped out in a week to 10 days, and it'll be replenished, and it goes out that fast. And I think the kids were really quite shocked at that. Right. But again, we focused we wanted the kids to focus, at least this we have in the past as well, focus on kids, because right. You know, we want them to understand what other kids' lives are like. This is not kids in other third world countries. This is kids in our neighborhoods. And so it's really important. At the Freestore Food Bank, they say that a student who is hungry and doesn't learn at school becomes an uneducated adult, and an uneducated adult can't learn. So can't earn, I'm sorry. So again, it's so important for in all facets of the student's life to come to school well fed and ready to go each day. Next slide, please.
So after the first year that we did this unit, I mean, the feedback was really amazing. Students enjoyed responding to the unit. They had a lot to say. I had a lot of them just tell me like they had no idea what was happening, and they were glad that they knew, because then they, you know, when you do things like at your local, you know, church or synagogue, and you're collecting for a family, like understanding more about what's going on and why people need things. We also received a lot of positive parent feedback. We actually had a parent that called us and said that her daughter went home and asked if she could take her allowance and go to the store and buy tissues and toothpaste and toothbrushes, and then you take it to a homeless shelter and donate it. I mean, she just really took a lot away from it. And the mom was just like, this is, you know, this is great. This isn't, you know, it's when you hear something from a parent, I know this from my own kids, they don't listen as much as when you are hearing it from somebody else. And, you know, teaching them about all of this, they really, I feel like, took it to heart, which was
right. The other amazing thing we did too, we had one of the students who packed Power Packs on one of our Power Packing days decided to have her birthday party at the Freestore Food Bank. And so the kids all came and they brought in canned foods and donations, and then they packed Power Packs for the birthday party. And then they went out to a room on the side and had birthday cake and stuff. But that, again, that wouldn't have happened
right
if it wouldn't be for this cause. So we feel there's some real positive takeaways from this.
Okay, next slide.
Okay. All right, so one of the books that we used when we started was Paper Things, and it's by Jennifer Jacobson. It was really a great book about a girl named Ari and her brother Gage, and they live in a foster home after their mom dies, and Gage is turned 19, so he's really out of the foster system, but he had promised his mom that he would take care of Ari, and so when things aren't going well at the foster home, he kind of takes her out and they're going to go out on their own. Well, of course, he doesn't have a job, and they do a lot of couch surfing. And so what it's like to be homeless. And so it gives the students a look into Ari's life as a sixth grader, and think about, well, what did that impact in the story? She didn't have breakfast in the morning. She would come to school hungry. Her clothes weren't washed. Sometimes she never had a computer unless she was couch surfing near somebody who was near a public library and she could go to the library. So it gave the students a really good look into what would life be like if you were homeless? What kind of things does it affect? And so this encouraged our readers to think about homelessness, our kids, in a new way. And what was impacted by that.
Well, and we've had students too in the district that have been homeless, and our kids don't know that. You know, we know as adults because we are doing things to try and help them get back on their feet or raising money or donating things. But when we told them that, I mean, they were shocked. And it was like, well, yeah, you know, you're not going to tell everybody about your living situation if it's something like that. So that was a great look at, you know, also thinking like, you don't know what's happening in somebody's life, you know, and what they have and what they don't have. And, you know, we talked a little bit about just being kind and showing empathy for one another.
Right. We spent a lot of time in our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade curriculum now to looking at what's your story, because students don't know. Sometimes they make assumptions about when people walk in the room. And so we need to think about how do we get to know the story. And there was a situation too while we were power packing that, that a boy came up to Jamie and said, hey, my last school, I got power packs.
Yeah.
And that was kind of powerful. And
he was so proud to be packing them then because he knew what it was like. And, you know, their circumstances had changed and he no longer needed to receive them. But yeah, I just remember like I was packing him right next to him and he was like, yeah, I used to get these. And he just kind of whispered it to me, didn't make an announcement to everybody. And that was just, it was really powerful. And then, you know, he worked really hard. He's like, let's try to get as many done, you know, as we possibly can, because he wanted to help as many kids as he could.
All right, next slide, please. During that year also, I did a couple of other grants that I wrote. I always think about what could we do? I'm always a big dreamer and a thinker, and what could we be doing? So one of the things, we had Tim Green out to speak, and I noticed that on his website that he was giving away, you could write a grant for 60 of his books. So I thought, okay, that's kind of an interesting thing. And the reason they were giving the books out were to schools that kids did not have books in their hands to take home, at-home books. And our kids, most of our kids, have books to take home. So I wasn't writing it for our school, and I made that very clear in the letter, but I was writing it because we wanted to include it in our poverty class in some way that we could have our kids give those books away. I also wrote a grant here in Ohio. We have the Buckeye Book Grant Award, and they awarded books as well. So we had about 70 to 80 books that we were ready to look at about giving them away. So, and we're going to talk about in a minute how that process, how the students actually decided to give those books away. We also, I have a group called Literary Lunch Bunch, and this is a group that meets once a month, and we talk about new fiction and nonfiction, and we did scary stories. But in one of our meetings during lunch, we wrote letters to future readers. So the kids picked the books that they knew about, and they wrote a letter to a future reader, just that hoping that they would enjoy the book like they enjoyed it. And so that's kind of what we did, and we stuck them in there before we went to this next step. Next slide.
So what we did is we invited several nonprofits in that we thought could use these books. The first one that we invited in was the Literacy Network of Greater Cincinnati. They had a tutoring program where the kids graduated and they were looking for some sort of gift to give those kids. We also invited in the Talbert House, which is a men's shelter. And then there was a school down the street that was in need of books as well. So we invited them in and they just talked to us about what they did and then how they would use the books. The kids couldn't choose just one. I mean, they liked every single organization. So they took those books and they divided them up between the three. Yes, just have a seat. All right, next slide, please.
You can sit on one side and one can sit on the other side right now. All right, our students have arrived, so we'll have them in a few minutes.
All right, so I also attended a conference that was led by Catherine Berger-Kay. She's like the service learning guru. This is her book right here. You guys can see it's also, two of them are on the screen. And just listening to her, I got a whole lot of different ideas that I could put in. She has a kid's guide to hunger and homelessness. I couldn't find that one to bring down, but there's a picture of it there. And I took some pages out of that too. I mean, there's a whole, you could use the entire book with all the different units to pace what you wanted to do, but I just wanted to kind of pick different pieces from it to use. So those two resources right there are great. The service learning book also doesn't just focus on hunger and homelessness. So if you wanted to do some sort of like service learning with a different topic, that would be a good book to use as well. Next slide.
So one of the things that, because I'm kind of closely involved with the Free Store Food Bank, they advised another thing would be the curriculum that the Atlantic Community Food Bank developed. And it's called their Hunger 101 curriculum. And so they have units already developed so that you could teach in primary, middle school, or high school. And we found that it was a little bit of a better match for our age group that we were using.
More age appropriate.
So the curriculum includes a glossary of words because, again, if you've not really studied poverty, a lot of the words need to be defined and talked about with our students. It also has a great reading list in there, and I picked off a couple of books off of there that were pretty good books, but more of those were on the primary age level. And then there's a film list, and there's also a lot of good websites to use on there.
At this time, our language arts teachers adopted paper things into their curriculum. So they started to read that book and then lead discussions. So it was a great connection. Channel 12 News here in Cincinnati at the same time also started a series called Cincinnati Childhood Poverty, a Cincinnati Crisis. They were investigating basically what's happening in Cincinnati. So I pulled a couple of clips, specifically the impact on education. There were a couple of teachers from Cincinnati Public that talked about the impact that she or he would see on students that were coming to school that hadn't had breakfast, or students that are continuously having to move, the gaps that were created because of that. So it showed the struggle to our students so that they so they could think about, well, how would I learn? Would I be able to pay attention if I had not eaten since, yesterday at lunch, something like that. So it was a great couple of clips to introduce. There are tons of different clips on a lot of different topics. So if you just Googled Channel 12 News and that title there, a lot of different things would pop up.
Right. Today's topic on this morning's news was a lot of the schools are putting in pantries. So we've had a lot of these feeding programs like the Power Packs, but now some of them are going to pantries. Our problem with the Power Packs is when the kids take them, only those kids get them at school, and they're usually primary age level kids. So when they take them home, there's siblings at home that don't have food. So they're opening up pantries. And the great thing about that is it's making a new connection. So when those parents come in, they're connecting with school, which is a connection that we need to have. Again, we're going to break this cycle of poverty, making that connection with school, and then getting them enough food so that all of those siblings have food over the weekend. So again, they're continuing their series still.
All right, next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about this past year, which is the year that we received the Jafarian Award. Next slide.
All right, so during the summer, I don't know, I had a parent email me say, hey, would you like to start a club? And I thought, oh, I already have clubs that, I don't want to start another club. But she said, check into Magnified Giving. So I went online and looked up about it, and it is an organization, it's a nonprofit organization that helps to grow young philanthropists. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting thing. And but my mind was already going, because again, that's what I do. It's like, oh, this would hook perfectly with our poverty costs, because it's not enough just to study it and do a service day, but becoming part of the solution or part of the safety nets, because safety nets are those organizations that help them to get to their family to stabilize, and so that they can be self-sufficient. So Magnified Giving, this organization had a curriculum all set up, and we looked at it again and said, whoa, that's like too much. We don't have that kind of time. But we wanted to take pieces of it. And we took, there are steps involved that you have to do. But the whole idea was they're going to give our students $1,000. So we apply, and our students get $1,000 to give to a nonprofit. So remember when we gave away those Tim Green books and the Ohio Buckeye books? I mean, that was giving away, the kids were excited about that, but $1,000, that was really cool. So now they had some incentive to like, okay, how are we gonna decide what organization? And the Magnified Giving has that curriculum all set up. So they're gonna look at the organizations, and the best thing about Magnified Giving is it is student driven. So that means that we can step away from it and we can just be the guides on this and say, here's a list of certified nonprofits, and it's your opportunity to explore this list. And we had to give them some guidelines because some of the things needed to deal with hunger, because we were looking for a matching grant from Kroger's, was giving us $500 to, if it was the organization would be something to do around hunger that the kids were doing. So, so we found that Magnified Giving fit perfectly in poverty.
Okay, next slide. So the first step of the Magnified Giving program was a discussion on what philanthropy is. We wanted for the kids to realize it's not just about treasure, because you know, when you're 11 and 12, you might have some allowance money, but you don't have a whole lot of money to actually give. So what they could give was their time and their talent. We had them start by looking at some famous philanthropists, and then groups shared out. So we had, you know, they looked at Bill Gates, looked at Warren Buffett, you know, other celebrities.
LeBron James.
They talked about his, was it his I Promise School. So we kind of started there. And then, next slide.
And then we brought in some speakers. The first speaker that we brought in was Roger Grine. And Roger is the founder of Magnified Giving. And I don't know, maybe he's like in his 80s, I believe. And so he has a very interesting story. He grew up in the next community right next to us, which has a lot of poverty. And so let me tell you a little bit about his story, because it is fascinating. We understand that they're making a movie about him. We haven't seen anything yet, but so when he was born, he was adopted at like 3 or 4 days old, and the couple was very loving. The doctor said he's probably not going to do much because he has cerebral palsy, so he might not talk or walk. Well, the family said, well, that's not going to happen. And so he grew up with this very loving family. He had a lot of obstacles to overcome. He went off to college and got his CPA. He came back, and his first job was at a bank. And he shares this when he gets up there and speaks and says, I got fired from the job. And he said, I wasn't a good fit. And a lot of this you'll see around his challenges of cerebral palsy. And I think sometimes people don't understand how to, don't understand the disorder, and so they're not really sure about him. He has talks really low, and so there's some gait problems, but they said he wasn't really a good fit. And he also said he didn't have good handwriting.
Yeah.
And so he said, so I had to decide what was I going to do next. I went back to my lawn cutting. I went around knocking on doors. In the first year I had 12 tax returns to do. That went well. I tapped on people that I knew, and his own tax agency grew from there. And it grew so well so that by 2008, he had about $7 million, and he was big into philanthropy. He promised organizations money, and that was what he did. He has a very good heart. But in 2008, the recession came, and he lost everything but about $65,000. And now he couldn't go back to those organizations and say to them, I'm sorry, I don't have money to give to you this year. I know I promised it. And so he decided to set up something that would be perpetual. And so that was Magnified Giving. And because it's perpetual, they have donors and sponsors. And so they go around, that's what they do, is give money out to students and have students follow the steps that Jamie's gonna walk through to give out this thing. A very inspirational speaker, and everybody bought in from day one on that. Mm-hmm. We had other couples come in. We had a couple here, local Wyoming couple, the Kremzars, and they started Crayons to Computers, and our big donors to the Free Star Food Bank. They talked about what it was that they like, why they're passionate about this, and why they give. And then next slide, please. We brought in our school foundation, and the school foundation talked about how to create a nonprofit, what to look at when you look at nonprofits, how they raise money, and then the process they go through to decide who gets the money. Because that's what our students were going to be. Our students were going to be philanthropists. They had to decide who was going to get the money. Next slide, please.
The second step of the Magnified Giving program, students needed to determine the needs of our community. So Magnified Giving actually allows students to look at all different types of issues, but we had our kids focus specifically on poverty in Cincinnati. Before we really started to research nonprofits, we needed to talk to the kids about what poverty was. So we used 2 different lessons from something called Teaching Tolerance so that they had a grasp of some of these key concepts. Next slide. So this is just, and these are taken exactly from Teaching Tolerance. So we focus on what is poverty, how the federal government defines it. We had them compare the poverty level with the cost of meeting basic needs in our community. We asked them to find somewhere to live and create a grocery list, and then they would then compare that to the federal government's poverty line. We would have them, we had them play a game called Spent. I think it's spent.org if you were to Google it, where they had to make decisions along the way about whether to spend money. You know, you want to go out, but you have to hire a babysitter. Do you want to spend that money, but then your car breaks down and then you need more money? So we had them walk through that to experience it. Next slide, please. We also talked about the difference between short and long-term poverty, factors that can determine and perpetuate poverty, you know, what can lead to it, what can fuel long-term poverty, and then also generational poverty. Next slide, please. So once they had a good grasp of what exactly poverty is, what it looks like, they started to research local nonprofits here in Cincinnati. Magnified Giving does give us a list of qualified agencies, which is really nice. So it's agencies that they have, that they have checked, that they know are legitimate. And that way our kids could just browse through them and decide which ones they thought they wanted to invite in and learn more about. Now we ask kids to think about, well, what are you looking for in an agency? And then what's important to you? Who would best utilize this gift? I know when we had speakers come in, one of the questions that they would always ask is, well, how much do you spend on administrative, costs? How much are you paying people with the money we're giving you? Because they wanted to make sure that the money that they were giving were going to people that needed help. Next slide, please. So, we had site visits and volunteering. So we had a lot of different nonprofits come in due to time constraints, because we only have the kids for 42 minutes and then they go to other teachers. And because of money, we couldn't go to all of these different nonprofits. So instead, we just either invited them to come in, or we would hold phone conferences where our kids would lead them through a series of interview questions. So our kids prepared interview questions, and then they had the presenters present, and then they just raised their hand and asked anything that they felt like they needed to know more information about, or any question that wasn't answered.
So Jamie did a lot of heavy lifting here, because you have to juggle this. So this is one of our obstacles. Is we have actually we have another teacher that is now teaching it along with her. Teddy Bolton is, and so there are now 6 classes that are doing this. So when we ask a speaker to come in, it's hard to ask them to come in, and luckily they're at the same time, so you could ask them to come in 3 times. But even that is difficult to get some of these people to step away from their organizations and come out and speak that many times.
Well, and also, when you're emailing these nonprofits asking for them to come in, it needs to come from your email. Like, we didn't want for our students to be emailing these nonprofits and then receiving responses back. So I had them write the emails. They would send the email to me, and then I would then forward it to the nonprofit. So that's also, it was time consuming, sending this and responding and then trying to set up times, but looking at it, that's what is the best, is like when they come in and they talk to the kids. So it was worth it. You just have to kind of go into it knowing that it's going to take a little bit of time.
Now Maggie's here, and she's going to tell you that, yeah, there were a lot of worksheets. That's what she said to me. It was a worksheet for everything, but it was a great way to engage them with the speaker, so they knew what they wanted to hear. So as the speaker was talking, they might jot a note down, but then they had the questions that they wanted to get answered. So the worksheets were a really good guide for the students on what it is they needed to ask. And that way they're also asking the same organization the same questions. Okay, so that was a part to have in there.
And then if you go to the next slide, it just shows two pictures of some of our students from last year packing power packs. So you can see that assembly line there where they had the paper bag, they would put an item and then they would pass it. And then at the end, we have them all get together. And then on the sign, it says how many power packs they packed. And it's just like, they always are so competitive and want to pack more power packs.
Right, because there's two lines going down, and then
Yeah.
there's a morning group and an afternoon
Yeah.
group. But again, when they think about how many power packs, if it's like, 1,200 that they packed in the morning, that's 1,200 kids that are not going to be hungry over a weekend. So that's really important.
Okay, next slide. All right, so we also did a fundraising effort with students where they sponsored a pajama day. So kids could bring in $1 or more, and they could then wear pajamas. We did this because I don't know, was the Kroger matching grant for that, or that was just in addition?
Right. So any money that we raised, they would match up to $500.
That's right. So we actually, was it $827? So kids donated $827, and then 500 of that Kroger then matched.
And Magnified Giving gave a stipend to teachers of
Right.
$250 for anybody who participated, and we foregoed all that, and that went into the mix as well.
Right. So we ended up having just a little bit under $3,000 to donate, which is very, very exciting. So we also had to have nonprofits complete grant applications. That was through Magnified Giving, but again, that goes through like how they're going to use the money, tax purposes, all that sort of thing.
But the students got to ask the organization.
Right. And read the grants,
right?
Or the applications,
right? And they wanted to know, what are you going to do with the money that we would be giving you,
right?
Because they wanted to know, because that's how they want to know how their money's spent.
Right. Yep.
And that's pretty true to life, because I know that they come back and my husband who works in a nonprofit, they say, how are you going to spend my money?
Right.
And so it's an important feature.
Okay, next slide. So finally, step 6, which was the last one, this is where they would advocate and vote. So we had probably 5 or 6 different groups supporting different nonprofits. So we had students create a public service announcement that gave a snapshot of what their nonprofit did and then how they would use the money. So they were advertising, promoting their nonprofit, and trying to convince their classmates that they should vote for their nonprofit to give that money to. So they filmed different nonprofits, and then they used Movie Maker to edit them and then put it together. They were about 30 seconds each. And then from there, next slide.
Again, they had like a worksheet for the storyboarding, and then so it was
graphic
guided
organizers, so that
along the way,
right? So they can think through that.
And if you need something like that and you're not sure when you go through this, be sure and email one of us, and you can always send the worksheet.
So then once the PSAs were complete, students then shared them with each other, and then they voted for which nonprofits they thought they should donate the money to. And then you can see there, we have pictures at the bottom. It was a ceremony where students got to present like the big cardboard checks. It was really cool, to the nonprofits that they selected, and they chose 3 different ones. They did Free Store Food Bank, Tender Mercies, and La Soup. So all 3 of those were invited to the ceremony. There was food that was catered by Magnified Giving. And then our kids emceed it and like ran the whole thing.
Yeah. Again, this award ceremony is student driven. So we had a student MC from our school. But what they do is they bring several schools together. And I think, I don't know if Maggie or Henry is going to talk a little bit about that. Was kind of what they thought about hearing from the other schools as well. So they got to talk about their organization and present, as they're going to talk about the big check presentation.
Yep. All right, next slide. So in May, we also found out about another opportunity where we could enter our public service announcements into a film festival that was being held by Children's Inc. So there were different categories, but the PSAs that we did, we basically just asked the kids, like, who would be interested in doing this? And we had quite a few groups raise their hands. And so we submitted them, and we ended up having, I think it's, Maggie, do you remember, it was like 3 or 4 different PSAs that actually like won, and they were accepted, and they were invited to a university. And there was a red carpet event, and they played their PSAs in front of everybody. It was another catered event. It was awesome, but it was a great opportunity for, like, I don't know, all different kinds of kids to experience success and share the hard work that they had done.
Another great thing about this is real life experiences, because this is what happens to people who are philanthropists, and they get invited to these programs and they're recognized for the work that they do. Obviously, that's not why they do it, but they're recognized and they come together and celebrate the nonprofit organizations and the work that those nonprofits are doing.
Yeah, and that picture there it's some of the kids that were there, and they're holding I made them hold their medals up. I did.
Like Olympians, that's right.
It's a smile. Yeah, I was very excited for them. All right, next slide, please.
So at this time, we're going to bring put our two students in our seats, and we're going to let them. They have a few things that they'd like to share with you. Some of their reflections about the class that they took last year. We'll turn it over to them. So we're just going to switch seats here real quick. And you can just kind of scoot in so you can see yourselves on this. Okay. All right, so I'd like to introduce, we'll start with Maggie first. And Maggie's organization that her team worked on was the Free Store Food Bank. So why don't you tell them a little bit about the organization, and then our host today will actually, after you're done talking, we'll show the video that you created.
Okay, so I'm doing about Free Store Food Bank.
Yeah.
So the Free Store Food Bank was like, it's this place where they take these foods and they give them out to students at schools and people everywhere really who need food but they can't get the food. So we went there and we packed power packs for these kids who needed food over the weekend but couldn't get them because they weren't at school. And then so like all these different foods so the Free Store Food Bank does food everywhere for people who can't get food on their own.
Well, and I remember, Maggie, too, talking to you when you guys did this. You said you really like the Free Store Food Bank because it helped kids.
Yeah, I remember that too. It was really cool because they did a lot with the kids to make sure that they got food too. So it wasn't just like, oh, adults, here's some food. It was also like, oh, kids, you need some food too. Yeah.
All right, and then that was the day of service. How about researching those organizations? How did you come up with the Free Store Food Bank? Is there any certain?
I think I was just looking stuff up and I found something that was related to the Free Store Food Bank, but it was very specific. And then I saw the Free Store Food Bank as a whole, and I thought it'd be really cool to do, and how they were focused with the kids and the whole thing. Really cool.
And how about how did you like working on the PSA? What was that experience?
Looking back on it, I really liked making the PSA. It was cool to see what you could do and spread the message and like just make it so that everybody around the world knew that there was something going on and people needed help, and that it was cool to get to put it together and see what you could do with it.
And then the big check presentation?
You had to make a speech, didn't you?
Me?
Yeah, did you? Yeah.
Wait, did I? Yeah, I think I did. And we had to like go up there and give it. It was cool, and you had to do it, and it was cool because you got to like give this away and give it to the people and talk to the people about the whole thing and how you did it. And then you got to, when you weren't giving the whole check away, which was really cool, you also got to see what other schools did and how it's not only you who's doing it, it's also all these other places who are also having the same ideas and goals as you.
All right, let's go ahead and show that PSA then. Good job, Maggie. All right, next slide, please. We'd like to introduce to you Henry at this time, and his organization that his team worked with was La Soup. Tell them a little bit about the organization, because it's kind of unique.
Yeah, the organization took food from like grocery stores, or I don't know, like places where you get food that they didn't like, people did not want to buy, and they bring them all together, and then they would make soups with them.
So some of the foods were what? Were misshapen?
Yeah,
Or they
Just-
were wilted?
Right.
not things that people wanted.
Not food that other people would buy or would
Yeah,
want.
right.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
And then on the, how did you come up with your organization?
So we I remember like we were researching them, and I would just scrolling down things, looking at the different organizations, and I stumbled across like the soup, and I thought it was a really interesting cause, like seeing what it came from and why they do it. So it's just very cool.
Well, and they too, I remember when the guy came in and talked to you guys about how it was challenging because they would get different produce every week. They never knew what they were going to get, right? So they had to be creative, and then they had to make all these different soups. And he said there was like this one fish soup or something that they make, but it sounded gross, but it was so good and everybody wanted it. So, and then your PSA, if you want to talk about that really quick, was really cool because it was different too than everybody's, because you guys did a little film part, right?
Yeah. The PSA, I don't know, just kind of creativity, I guess, bringing it together. And like, it was fun to look up the stuff making the PSA, like all the facts and stuff. And there's just like things that you learn in the process. It was really cool.
All right. And then how about the big check presentation?
That was really cool. Just seeing all the schools coming together that did the program. And that like they all come together and they're all different. They all did different things. So it's just really cool to see and give away that check.
Excellent. All right, so let's go ahead and show Henry's PSA.
Two in every 7 kids in Cincinnati are born into poverty, yet food waste is still a major problem all over the world.
Kids in poverty don't get food every single day.
They take this food and distribute it amongst those who are in poverty.
An average person would take this perfectly fine banana and throw it away without thinking, but La Soup rescues this and turns it into a delicious soup. This is a great cause. I hope you can support.
And both of their films went to the film festival. So, and that was really cool. It was kind of a nice additive to this program. So I want to thank Henry and Maggie for coming and sharing some of the reflections. Any last thoughts you want to say about the program? Would you recommend it to other students?
Yes.
Yeah, it was cool.
Learning a lot of new things.
It was nice to be a part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
To be something bigger, being part of something bigger than yourself. Excellent, Maggie. Well, thank you guys. All right, so we're going to let you switch out, and we're going to come in here and finish up the last couple of slides real quick. And so if you could go to the next slide for us. The future, and we're excited about this. We're excited the grant money that we received, we will now have a budget. So we can, we're going to plan to meet in the next probably beginning of January to start planning for what's going to be coming this year. So next slide, please.
So some of the different things that we were thinking of for the future is more service learning trips, whether that is having just small groups of kids going out to different nonprofits and or agencies to learn more about them and actually get to see what they're doing and the difference that they're making, rather than always having the nonprofits come to us. So we've talked a little bit, we have to talk logistics and whatnot about, you know, if kids could figure out where they want to go and then send groups with a teacher to different places so that they can experience those. In my head, I'm imagining this like 2 days of just like service and learning and time to get to know these nonprofits that we are going to potentially donate our Magnified Giving to.
So one of the obstacles in this is that a lot of the nonprofit organizations are small organizations and they can't accommodate like 60 kids like we do with the Free Star Food Bank. So we have to rethink that. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of take that bus downtown Cincinnati, have maybe 5 organizations, and we drop off 10 kids at 5 different locations with one of a student or a a staff member or another adult, and they will actually spend a couple hours in that organization learning about the organization, maybe taking a look and chatting with some of the clients. So that would be another great thing that we could do as a result of our award. Next slide, please. So the future. So a good place to start conversations might be with these books. These are brand new books. I haven't even given them to Jamie yet. So the first one is On Our Street, that first talk about poverty. It's a picture book, but it has some good ideas about where should you start with the conversation. What kind of questions are kids going to have about, like, why is that person homeless? Why don't they have a place to go home to? The other one that's up here, and these again are one's 2017, one's 2018, the books that have come out. This one is on poverty and hunger. So again, another look into it, good conversation starter. So these will be giving out to Jamie to kind of start maybe, and one of them has a teacher, some teacher papers with it that you can, a curriculum that you can use with it. Next slide. I'm really excited about this book, and I didn't bring it because it's been checked out. So Free Lunch. This is an amazing memoir. It's by Rex Ogle, and this is a memoir of his life in poverty. It starts off with Rex, his mom and him are going off to the grocery store, and she's very short with him and said, we have to get what's on the list and what we have coupons for, and don't be asking for anything else. And he's not happy because he's not like all the other kids. And for the first time, he has to go to school and tell them that he is on free lunch when he gets to the end of the lunch line. And of course, the lady who is taking that information, the cashier, is hard of hearing. So it's hard for him to speak up louder to say free lunch. And he devises a system where he's not with his friends, he's not with anybody he knows, so that when he gets through the line, the whole story is about how they deal with poverty. And it's a very, very compelling memoir. It should be required reading for everybody. It builds empathy and compassion, and you're cheering for Rex the whole way. An excellent read. One other thing that we're thinking about adding this year is going back to those books like we did a few years ago. There is a Scholastic program called Scholastic Face. It's family community involvement. And so I signed us up for it. And so we can get like Scholastic books at 80% off if we're using them for things with family and community involvement. And again, it's putting books into hands of kids who don't have a book library at home, that don't have those books. So we might decide, if someone chooses literacy, we might choose to purchase books so that those kids may be awarding them money, but they'll also be awarding them books. And this would be the opportunity for them to choose books that they like, that are meaningful to them, and give to other kids. Right. So that's kind of a cool thing. Next slide. So here we put, and throughout our PowerPoint, we have linked to all the different pieces, the curriculums that we've used, in hopes that if you'd like to create it, it would give you some building blocks in which to start on. And the last slide. So if you'd like to connect with Jamie or I, our email addresses are there. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. Twitter is not open at school, so I'm only as good as what I remember when I get at home. So sometimes I'm tweeting about it, and sometimes some of the things just go by the wayside because I can't get them up there. But I was really good last year on doing the Poverty and Philanthropy class and putting things up there last year as we were doing them. So we want to thank you for joining us today. Yep. And I'm hoping that you too will choose something like our Poverty and Philanthropy class, maybe the poverty, maybe the philanthropy, if you could do it together. It wouldn't have to be done in a separate class. You could take parts of it and utilize it in your classes. Yep. Any last thoughts?
No, just if you guys need anything, if we've referenced different graphic organizers that we've used, or lessons, something that you can't find, links that don't work, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you get set up and anything else that you may need.
Last thing, thank you so much to the American Library Association. Yes. And for the Sarah Jafarian Award. It is going to be meaningful to our students and to us and to places out in our community too. So thank you so much.
Great. Huge thank you to you both for doing this presentation for us, and to everyone who is watching this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.